Tonight, I want to take us back to 1965, Newport, Rhode Island, where a nice young Jewish boy was about to make his third straight appearance at the annual Newport Folk Festival. That nice young Jewish boy was named Robert Allen Zimmerman, but you probably know him better as the legendary Bob Dylan. How many of you are Bob Dylan fans? That's good. I suppose you could call me a fan as well. I only own nearly all of his records on vinyl and was lucky enough to see him live a few years ago. By 1962, Bob Dylan had broken onto the folk scene when he released his debut album of folk covers and original folk music. Over the next 2 years, Dylan, the grandson of Jewish immigrants from Odessa who had fled the Russian Empire to escape pogroms, became one of the biggest folk stars in the country. Like his grandparents before him, who left the only home they had ever known, Dylan also took a chance, albeit in a very different way. His album, Bringing It All Back Home, released in March of 1965, featured electronic music, which Dylan had never played before. In fact, he was known specifically for his folksy acoustic sound, so it was quite a shock and a disappointment to many of his fans. On that July day in 1965 at the Newport Folk Festival, when the great Peter Yarrow, who many of us had the great pleasure of seeing perform at Chazan Stein's concert earlier this year, introduced Bob Dylan, it was to massive cheers. Those cheers, however, soon turned to boos as Dylan plugged in his Fender Stratocaster and he and his fully electric band opened with the song Maggie's Farm. A roar came over the audience with loud boos mixed in with shouts of delight. Even the great Pete Seeger commented that he wanted to cut Dylan's cables with an axe. People can boo all they want. I am not afraid of change, and I will continue to play what I want, Dylan said. Over time, those shouts of delight overpowered the boos as this electric era of Dylan's music, such as his great album, Highway 61 Revisited, is now considered to contain some of his greatest songs ever written and performed. He actually just performed a few of those songs for the first time in over a decade the other night. Changes are hard. When we are not prepared for changes in our lives, we act like some of those audience members in Newport back in 1965, booing that which we are not used to. There are so many challenges when it comes to change in our lives. We're comfortable with our routine. We fear failure. We don't know how to find the courage to get through the change. There is comfort in stability. We like what we have and how we do it, and when things start to change in our life, they shake up our routine, causing us discomfort. Now, who here likes change? Not nearly as many fans as there were of Bob Dylan. Who here doesn't like change? Who didn't vote? Who here has to get the new iPhone each year? The new iPhone 15 just came out. Who here is still holding on to their BlackBerry? Let's be honest. There has been a huge change in all our lives over the past few months with the merger of our communities. Becoming HAMAKOM shook many of us out of the comfort of the routines we knew and enjoyed at Temple Aliyah and Shomrei Torah Synagogue. For many of us, we were comfortable with how things were, with what we had as a spiritual community, and we feared the unknown. What was HAMAKOM going to look like? The fear of being removed from the comfort of our routine, from the stability in our lives is natural. But many times, this fear of the unknown turns out to be much greater than the reality. How many of you have ever had to make a huge geographical change in your life? It's not easy. It's not. Packing up our belongings, saying goodbye to our home, to our friends, to our community, and starting over somewhere new where we might not have the same support system and stability that we did in our old home. Perhaps one of the greatest examples of this change is with our ancestor Abraham. God said to Avram, "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing." God tells Avram to leave the comfort of his routine, the comfort of what he knew, of how he lived, and of where he lived. Not only was he to leave the land and home that he knew, but he was to leave his former spiritual life behind, a life of idolatry for a life of monotheism. This was a radical change for Avram. Had he stayed home and refused to listen to God's command of change, the story of the Jewish people would have ended there with Avram saying, "No, I can't do this. Find someone else. It's not me." We all have similar stories of us having to make a radical change in our lives, whether it was our choice or not. The biggest change to my life so far was when I chose to seek out the rabbinate and decided to attend the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies here in Los Angeles. At this point in my life, I had never left home. I had never lived on my own. There was plenty of anxiety and fear of the great unknown. Was this huge change in my life going to help me, or was it going to break me? Could I really get through 6 years of rabbinical school living in Los Angeles? It took tons of courage to step out of my comfort zone in Georgia and to take the plunge into this huge change. It was a sink or swim moment for me. And it worked out. Had I not taken that plunge, I would not have met my amazing and beautiful wife, Sarah, who's with us tonight. I would not have been ordained as a rabbi, and I would not get to work with this incredible community, our wonderful staff and clergy. Change isn't easy. For some people, it takes longer to change. When you're at the beach, how many of you run or jump right into the ocean? And a few people. I know it's cold in the Pacific. How many of you take your time adjusting to the temperature of the water before feeling a little bit more comfortable going out? Yeah, it's more comfortable that way a little bit. This is the nature of change. For some people, they just want to jump right in. For others, it takes a little bit more time. Either option, though, takes an immense amount of courage. It's not easy for everyone to muster up the courage for this change, though. According to historical scholars, 80% of the Israelite slaves stayed in Egypt. 80%. While the remaining 20% were up for the task of change. For this 20%, it took an immense amount of courage to leave Egypt and to head out into the wilderness. And now they're standing at the edge of the sea, arguing with each other about who is going to jump in first. And then all of a sudden, amidst the arguing, Nachshon ben Aminadav of Judah jumped in, following his tribe. Nachshon knew that if they kept arguing, no one would push forward. It would all end there. He was ready for this change, and he made the decision to jump in. The rest soon followed at their own pace until everyone entered the sea on their way to the great unknown. Change takes courage. Whether we jump in like Nachshon or we take a little bit more time, only through change can growth occur. And yet these moments are so hard. Now I'm going to get a little technical here for just a moment. There's a physiological concept developed in the 1980s by neuroscientist Peter Sterling, biologist Joseph Ayer, called allostasis. Allostasis is based on the idea that rather than being staid and stable, our healthy baseline is a moving target. Healthy systems crave stability after a change. But that baseline of stability can be somewhere new. Stability through variation. Adopting this outlook acknowledges the goal is not to avoid, to fight, or try to control change, but rather to skillfully engage with it. Now, we all fight change in our lives. We don't want to change our diets or our daily routines. We don't want to learn a new program or a new operating system or learn new protocols at work. It's so hard. We like the way we do things. And how do we fight the change around us while living in a world that demands change? Just this past Shabbat, yesterday, we read Moses' powerful poem to the people just before he was going to die, where he refers to God as the rock. Not the Michael Bay movie, but Moses wanted the people to know that while he was not going to be joining them in Israel, that his role as leader was ending soon, that there would be a constant in their life, God. The image of a rock conveys strength, reliability, protection, power, and a constant, immovable source of refuge. This image gave the people a metaphor that they can fall back on in times of anxiety, distress, insecurity, and fear. When we are faced with the fear and anxiety of change, we too must be reminded of that which is constant in our lives. Our tradition provides us with that constant. Each week, Shabbat is there to ground us, to remind us that even with all the changes happening in our lives, Shabbat is there for us. To introduce any radical change into our lives is not easy. Whether it's leaving the land and life that we know, practicing a new form of worship and prayer, or seeing someone play a style of music that our ears and hearts just are not ready for. Change is hard. It shakes us out of our comforts and our routines, and it requires great courage and strength to take that leap into the sea. As you think about change in the coming year, there will be many areas in which it's going to take some courage, some jumping, little tiptoeing. When it comes to HAMAKOM, there are some of you who were Nachshonim, jumping head first with excitement for the future. Others are still tiptoeing into the water, cautious and worried that the comforts that we knew at Temple Aliyah and Shomrei Torah Synagogue are being changed too much too fast. But the truth of the matter is, we are all in this together. We all need to get into the sea of HAMAKOM, finding the courage inside all to see the great potential that HAMAKOM must be the place for Jewish community, for learning, for exploring, and yes, for changing ourselves for the better. And when it comes to our personal lives, some of you will be able to make radical changes this year. Others will make changes more slowly. Whether it's radically altering your schedule or your diet, as I did this past week, cutting out coffee and caffeine cold turkey in preparation for today's fast, or implementing small changes into your routine. Within these changes, we're able to find stable ground, even if it takes some getting used to. Change is hard because we have to stop our current forward motion and change direction. We're going somewhere new rather than staying on the same line. New lines are created as we engage with change. On Yom Kippur, we beat our chests, knocking at our souls to not fall into the same traps that we did the previous year. We must knock ourselves off balance. As we'll read in the Torah tomorrow morning, we are to afflict ourselves on this day. We are called to head into the waters of discomfort and to stay there for 25 hours, finding the courage and strength to find a way to change direction in our lives for the better. Teshuvah means to return. We're called to stop in our tracks, to change direction, to find the baseline of stability within the change. Change is not for the lighthearted, but without change, we are stuck in between the Egyptians and the sea, choosing between living in the past with fear of the future or embracing the change in front of us, discovering the great potential that awaits us on the other side. Gemar Chatima Tova.